News Radio 700 WLW.
When you work for a company, sometimes you feel like they own you. Don't you feel that way? That regardless of what you do on the job, from 9 to 5 or 10 to 7 or whatever your hours may be, that when you go home, you always seem to be bugged by something, maybe work that you have to take home with you. Or maybe it's that annoying email that comes in from your manager or maybe from the CEO of the company at 9 p.m. saying, this needs to be addressed immediately. Why are we doing this? Can you get on this immediately when you get in the morning? Yada, yada, yada. And you feel like there's no time for you to decompress. And let's face it, if you're working from home, it's even worse. Because you don't see these people on a daily basis except perhaps for some two-dimensional Zoom call. And so you're not sure exactly where the boundary lines are. When do I stop working? When do I close the laptop? And when do I start getting ready for the rest of my life? A lot of companies are doing this now, and a lot of countries are passing legislation, or at least looking at legislation, called Right to Disconnect. In other words, if I work for you, when I disconnect, when my workday is over, you can't bother me until my workday begins at whatever time it's supposed to begin the next day. And there are a lot of people, more employees than employers, that think this would probably be a good idea here in the United States. In fact, a 2016 law gave French workers the right to turn off electronic work devices outside of business hours. Is this a good idea for us? Standing by is somebody who is a workplace expert. His group is the Vested Group, a firm that's always on one of the best places to work in America. And he's our good buddy, Joel Patterson. Joel, how are you on this glorious Thursday?
I am well, Ken. How are you?
I'm still connected, but I'll be disconnecting at 3 o'clock, and nobody's going to get a hold of me then. But that's atypical, right? A lot of people feel like if you work for them, that they own your day. They can have you anytime they want, either through phone call or direct message or text or email. And it's been going on for years, decades. What do you think the chances are of companies pulling away from that kind of philosophy?
Well, I think that's happening anyway for a lot. I think, having the boss that yells at you, or having the boss that feels like he can call you at any time of night and expect a response, those bosses aren't in high demand, let's say that. And these days, it's so difficult to recruit and retain people. If you're doing that, you're probably going to lose your people in this economy. What we're facing right now with the labor shortage.
Yeah.
I think that the right to disconnect laws, very difficult to enforce. I have no idea how they would even try to do that. I mean, One of the benefits of the work from home world we're in these days is to be able to kind of set your own hours.
Right.
So how do you define what those disconnect hours are? How do you define what an urgent communication is that would allow that? I think it really comes down to more, kind of boundaries that you set as an organization. I'm not sure that laws are going to get us there, but not sure that I want laws to get us there.
Right,
it seems like we're trying to legislate everything at this point.
Yeah, no, I'm 100% with you. It's not a law. I mean, it works in places like France that are socialist countries, Canada to a lesser degree, but it would work in environments like that. But in a country like America, no. The specter of losing your job, if you're not completely beholden to the company, I think has dissipated here over time. Now, we're seeing the Great Resignation take effect. We're seeing I think 11 million plus unfilled jobs in this country. So the onus is really on the employer, not the employee. But I think, when you go to every company I worked at in the latter half of the 20th century was big on culture. Our mission and our culture. That's all I wanted to talk about, mission and culture. Well, if indeed mission and culture are important, then a smart CEO will create a culture where he will say, we're not going to conduct business unless it's an absolute emergency that affects the welfare of people after 6 o'clock every night. That would be part of the culture, right?
You're absolutely right, and it should be. I mean, that is something that we preach. One of the things that I don't like is this term of work-life balance, because I get the concept, but it always kind of makes one seem evil and the other seem good. And I think recognizing that, hey, there is some crossover. We do have, if we have a bad day at home, probably going to have a bad day at work. There is crossover there, and we've got to recognize that sometimes they're in conflict. But as long as an organization recognizes that, hey, we want you to have a life. We know your life being being where you want it to be is going to make you a better employee, more engaged, more productive.
Right.
So we want you to be happy at home. So it's important that the leaders of those organizations do set those boundaries, let people know that their time is important to him as well, and respect it. Because also the hardest thing I find when we talk about this with leaders is telling them not to send emails at 7 or 8 at night, because what happens is that it's not a good example, but it also creates stress for those people that may want to disconnect. So you got to make sure as a leader of an organization that you're actually drinking the Kool-Aid.
Right, exactly. Because the leader is disconnecting, right? I mean, he'll
Exactly.
walk out the door barking commands, and you don't see him for, like on a Friday, you don't see him for the weekend, or you get that email. But, invariably, and again, this is anecdotally on my part, the people that have risen to the top seem to be either workaholics, completely driven, that probably have their own personal lives out of balance with their work, or they're people who have kissed the right rear end on the way up, and now their rear end they demand to be kissed. And so I think it's a very difficult concept. And again, this is by and large, it's not everybody, and it's anecdotal, but I think a lot of these people that run these companies are incapable of changing their thought process, and therefore their companies suffer in the process. I don't know if you see any validity to that, but it's certainly been my experience. What about you?
Well, no, I absolutely do. And I believe that problem is fixing itself as we speak. There's not enough labor in the market for people that lead in that manner and that don't respect people's personal lives to be able to continue to grow their business or even staff their business. I mean, it's just too difficult. As a leader of an organization that has always focused on culture and always made it at the forefront of what we do, it is harder now than it has ever been in my career, hands down. Yeah. And there are no industries that are immune from it. So those people that are leading that way are going to have a difficult road ahead if they don't make some changes.
Sure, because life has changed, society has changed, and the guy banging his shoe on the desk, screaming at mid-managers, the kinds of things you might see in the 60s and 70s when they've gone flying out the door. But honestly, Joel, I wouldn't want somebody to work for me if I owned a company if they didn't understand that this wasn't their life, it was a segment of their life. Because then I would think, if I've got somebody and they're always there and it's 10 o'clock at night and they haven't gone home, I would think there's something wrong with this person. Because invariably,
Absolutely.
They're either going to snap or they're going to get so burned out that they're not going to be productive for me anymore. I wouldn't want that kind of person working for me.
You're exactly right. And those people are out there because they think it's a badge of honor to work all those hours, when in reality, what you just mentioned is what's happening is they're not well-rounded, and they're not able to kind of grow the way that you need them to, even if they're putting in 1 million hours. Yeah. It's just a very short-term perspective on it, and it can be. You're right. That kind of stuff is definitely detrimental to the organization overall.
Okay, so we know what the problem is. Joel Patterson is our guest, workplace expert. He heads up the Vested Group. Okay, we know what the problem is. You sense that there are a lot of companies moving away from that kind of behavior. How many? What percentage? And when do you think we get to a point where, if not by law, what France and Canada are trying to do, certainly in spirit what France and Canada are trying to do? How far away do you think we are from that?
Well, I mean, I feel like we're a lot further than what maybe the media. Here's the deal. I really think it's a difference in the types of companies that you're looking at when you have that conversation. Because you look at what gets the most press, Google, Apple, Amazon, all that kind of stuff. They're one segment, and they're easy to pick on. And when you hear a lot of bad press or people speaking badly about their employer, a lot of times it's those large organizations. Well, the reality is most people work in small companies. And I think in small companies, they're way ahead of this, way more ahead of this than you might realize, because it is so personal to them. It is so that those relationships that they have, I mean, they see the immediate impact of how they treat people when they're, bothering them at night or treating them, whatever it might be. So I really think that from a small business perspective, we're doing pretty well. People are growing and understanding that they just want to be treated the way that you would. And but some of the large corporations, you still see some bad actors, and usually even in there, it's just a few people or a couple people. There's a lot of good people working in big organizations, but they still got a lot of work to do. But it's also much more difficult to get large companies like that to shift. And
as generations go on, those that want that balance, and again, I know you don't like work and home and work-life balance. I know you don't care for that, but it is.
I'll let it slide.
Yeah, thanks. But as we go on generationally, and people that have had that dilemma become in charge of these companies, I think it becomes less of a problem, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's just, I think you see that every single day as we bring, recent college graduates or people that have only been in the workforce for a couple of years. You see it is different. I'm not a huge fan of the millennial stereotype, because the millennials that I work with, I don't find to be that way. I work with a lot of really driven, focused, hardworking millennials. But they certainly have a different take on things and a different perspective on how they should be treated, and I don't find it to be bad. It's just a shift, and yeah. I think it'll get easier as we go along.
I think so too. It's always great having you on because you speak reason, you bring hope, and that's why we like Joel Patterson. Joel, you stay well. We need to hear your voice now, and we'll connect down the road. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Take care.